Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to Environmental Coffee House. I did not get to do all the sharing I wanted to do, but hi, Antonio, how are you?
Hey Sandy, I'm doing well. Thanks for asking. Hope you're doing okay.
Not bad. I hope our audio's good. Vegematics with us and TCR Galaxies with us, so this is great. This is great. So, what's been shaking with you, Antonio? Tell us all. Do tell before we start, so people have time to join and I have time to share.
Yeah, I've just been working like a maniac. I work in the mental health field for people, it's information, and of course, during this time of COVID-19, an irresponsible response from the U.S. government, our company has taken massive losses and loss of employees. So I've been working something like 12-hour days, 7 days a week.
Oh my God, that's quite a bit. That's yeah, a lot. Well, I guess we've both been doing things in our own way because I've been working in the garden and my back tonight is so raw. It's awful. But I'm here because I am dedicated. I love you and I love everybody out there. So, of course, we're going to do a good show. CB, TCR, Tina. Hi, Karen. And Basil's here. Namaste, brothers and sisters, he says. So, we're going to have a good show tonight. Why don't you fill us a little bit in on what the show is about and what you want to do?
Yeah, so right now the United States is undergoing a lot of social unrest due to the killing of George Floyd. But I don't want to simplify this and say that this immediate interaction that we're having on the national stage is directly because of George Floyd.
Right.
I think the incident with George Floyd was a catalyst. um, so we're going to talk about the context leading up to George Floyd, as opposed to talking about what happened specifically with George Floyd. What we're going to talk about here is police brutality. We're going to talk about the statistics involved. We're going to talk about how it impacts the top three demographics in the United States: white people, black people, and Latino Hispanic. We'll also talk about police brutality and its impacts on mental health,
Right.
people who are having mental health crises, um, and how police have responded to that.
Okay.
We'll talk a little bit about, as well, the history of policing in the United States. I think it's very pertinent for people to understand where we come from in order to know where we are going. Um, and there's over a 200-year history now of
Jeez.
policing in the United States from our colonial.
200? That's all? It's not longer than that. What was going on when we first came over? Well,
You
I
know,
didn't come over. My family didn't come over. Somebody did 400 years ago.
a lot of people actually are, I would say, a little lost about the history of policing. People just assume that police forces have always existed. There had always been in different societies and cultures policing like agencies.
Right.
Um, Maybe it would be the King's Guard,
Hmm.
or perhaps it would be a specific type of patroller or constable for specific reasons. In the United States, policing really had adapted, evolved from in the South, the antebellum South,
Right.
from slave patrols.
Yeah.
And in the West and the Northeast, policing had really developed and evolved from Indian removal rangers. Um,
Wow.
and if you look
Indian
at,
removal rangers? That was what they
yeah,
were called? Wow. How come I don't
um,
remember that? Hmm.
well, these are, well, you probably would just have heard them called, I mean, they're rangers,
Mm-hmm.
but that was their job, was to remove Indians, Native Americans, and this would, of course, lead up to the Indian Removal Act under Andrew Jackson, the Trail of Tears, where anywhere between 60,000 to over possibly up to 125,000 Native Americans were ethnically cleansed from the eastern seaboard, particularly here in the South. And you need rangers to do that. You need a subservient class that is sanctioned by the state to kill at will, to forcibly remove what the white population considered a threat. What was the threat? The presence of Native Americans. So you need rangers to remove them. And then, of course, there's the ongoing but necessary threat of black people in the United States, the slaves. Someone needs to keep them under control. Someone needs to make sure that they're not running about and leaving the plantation. And so we have slave patrols.
Right. You've talked about that before. It's pretty tarnishy history we have. I mean, it's never been Mayberry RFD.
Right, and it puts a whole nother spin on the idea of Blue Lives Matter, right? So this would be the equivalency of the guard, telling us as they're beating and killing the people they're guarding that no, we're the ones who are really at danger here. And it's clearly the victims who are the ones at most risk, not the people who are sanctioned by the police or sanctioned by the state.
Right.
And in our modern era, with military garment and equipment to execute at will if need be.
Seems like that's what's happening now. I mean, this week there were five. Were there five hangings, and some of them are being attributed to suicide, which I don't believe for a minute. Sorry, my lighting is kind of screwy tonight. Yeah.
Well, and
to
this
my
is
eyes.
again not ahistorical. We've seen in the United States throughout our history something I mentioned before. I'll mention again. Jeff Beauregard Sessions was the Attorney General Alabama, and he directly refused to investigate a lynching case, saying we didn't have the resources. So the idea that police officers or attorney generals, the legal system, I call it the criminal system, would take seriously the value of black lives is why there's a movement altogether. So for black people, no, we're not surprised. This has been the history of America. It's not at all a surprise that you can find after a sort of white backlash. That's what, of course, the lynchings are. They're a type of white backlash.
It's embarrassing to me. It's horrible. It's horrid. It's terrible. It's awful. It's hideous.
And it's meant to scare, it's meant to discourage, and it's meant to dispirit the black movement. And really, because we're increasingly, and we'll talk about this when we talk about the demographics, we're increasingly a more multiracial country. And so it's really meant to discourage, disenfranchise black and brown people across the board.
What a shame. I think it's beautiful that we're becoming a diverse, what the melting pot was supposed to be. It's supposed to be a beautiful thing.
And what's particularly interesting about the time that we live in, if we're using history as an analog, many of the police officers that served the communities were KKK members. Of course, I'm not going to make that allegation today. That would be considered highly inflammatory. But what I will say is, why do we have this issue that police officers are totally disinterested in this clearly cultural signal of lynching? And why is that so reminiscent of the sort of dismissiveness toward the value of black lives that we've seen before in American history? And I think those are salient questions to ask. I think those communities and Americans around the country should be enraged to simply accept that, these young black men are going out, killing themselves, hanging themselves in public. in front of Capitol State House buildings and Capitol buildings and things of that nature and parks. And then having the police so quickly say, "Oh, well, was a suicide, apparent suicide." Um, but what I wanted to do is kind of segue directly into the topic that we're talking about, and that's police shootings in the United States. Um, I really wanted to tackle this issue from the point of view of someone who has went to college, is trying to marshal that knowledge to understand the world that I am. And of course, I'm also coming to you as a Negro American, as a Black American. So I have my own very real cultural experiences, particularly because I grew up in Tobacco Town, the United States, Winston-Salem, North Carolina, the tobacco town where J.R. Reynolds is headquartered. Uh, and many of my family members actually work for J.R. Reynolds. So we have a kind of a family legacy not too far from the tobacco plantations. So so I want to kind of talk to you from that perspective. Um, Now, looking at the database for policing is, I think, the best way to really engage what the episode of police violence, brutality, and shootings look like in the United States. Uh, the Washington Post database, is that the one? Yeah. So, yes. Yeah, I'll give a little bit of the background on this by quoting the former director of the FBI, James Comey. Um, we can't have an informed or rational discussion about police shootings in the United States because there simply isn't reliable data. Um, Again, that's the former Republican head of the FBI, James Comey, talking about police shootings in the United States and the data on them. Um, what's important to note before we talk about the Washington Post data is that police self report their shootings.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And what we have learned from criminologists, Penn State, Harvard, and others um, is that police underreport the number of people they kill by almost 50%. That is to say, if any given police precinct were to kill 10 people, their reports would reflect that only 5 people were killed by the police. So this Washington Post database goes in and tries to identify across the country how many people were killed by the police. Again, there is no clear way to know for sure in the United States, specifically in the United States, how many people are killed by our police officers. So let that be the kind of disclaimer as we piece through the Washington Post police shooting database.
It's pretty good. I said jump to the database, and here we are, and it has the start with let's see here, and I know everybody can hear me now. I had muted myself for a minute. Okay, where are we going? We have the first thing is the rate of the shootings. Did you want to talk about that? Or do you want to go right down to where we click on and play around with the data?
So we're going to go and click and play with the data. Sam, do you
Okay.
mind choosing the year 2018? So scroll back up at the top.
Okay, well, I'm in the search the database. So, you
Can you
want
not
me?
specifically look at the year 2018?
All right, let's see. Where do I get that from? Because there's a lot of stuff. I don't want to make everybody dizzy looking at this. Okay, I don't know how to pick 2018. I'm just in the database with all the with all there's the
Okay, there's an image that I sent to you. Do you mind just putting that up?
I
That's direct
don't mind
2018.
putting that up at all. If everybody waits for 1 second, and we will get this, and show you the image first, and then we'll go into the database and play. It is cool. It really is. All right. So and then once the image is up, the U.S. police killings 2018. That's what you wanted.
But you're at least there's a toggle. There should be a toggle where you should be able to click on the year 2018 and actually look at who
Okay.
died in 2018 by
I can look
race.
at that while you're looking at this. While you're looking at this and talking about U.S. police killings, I can look for the toggle so I can change the data.
Oh, perfect,
See
perfect.
where we are?
Yes.
Okay.
So this graphic here is something I just composed, taking straight from the database. So U.S. police killings from 2018. So the first thing that you should know about police killings in the United States is based off of the methodology composed by the Washington Post. The police, on average, kill about 1,000 U.S. citizens a year. That's why I chose 2018 because, first of all, it's a complete year. It's 2 years ago, so that means that these numbers had time to digest, so to speak, as opposing to using this year's number, where a lot of those cases are still ongoing and there's a lot of things that are still going on. So that's why I didn't use 2019s or 2020s. So let's look at this a little bit. So the first thing to draw your attention to is when I did the comparison numbers, I just rounded 996 up to 1,000. So it'd be easier for us to understand and digest. So the first thing to look at is on the far left side where you see 70%, 13%, 17%. Those are the percent of the population in the United States that are white, black, Hispanic, Latino, according to the United States Census. Um, and beside those numbers, I have bracketed so then what percent of those populations are male? So 35% of the population is white male, 6% of the US population is black male, and 8% roughly of the US population is Latino male. Okay? The dark numbers are the numbers of people that the police have killed. The police have killed 399 whites, 209 blacks, 140 Latinos, and then there's this last category, 240 unknown. So I don't know if that's because they were Asian or they were Oriental or something of that nature. It doesn't really specify. So, looking at these numbers, we can actually learn a lot about American policing. And remember, this is what the police say about themselves. So, actually, let me change that. We can learn a lot about what policing in America says about itself. And something my mother used to tell me, if someone is willing to tell you who they are, I would believe them. So, who do the U.S. policing say they are? Well, when we look at these numbers, the first thing that I should tell you is that because we are in a capitalist society, we completely disregard any statistics on socioeconomic or education in regards to people police kill. Why? Because we would, of course, find that nearly all people who the police kill are from the working class. None of them are going to, almost none of them will be highly educated. Almost none of them will be making $100,000 or more. Okay? Will there be a few? Perhaps, but we almost know that will be a statistical anomaly, but we don't keep up with that. But I do want to keep that in mind as we go through this. So the first thing that we notice are the yellow numbers. These numbers show not what percent of the population each demographic is, but what percent each demographic is in terms of representing the number of people who are killed by the police yearly. So of the 1,000 people on average who will be killed by the police each year, 39% in 2018 were white, 39.9%. In 2018, of those who were killed, 20.9 were black. Of those who were killed, 14.8 were Hispanic Latino. Okay, so what does this all mean? Looking at this data, the first thing you have to do is compare, in order to understand proportionality, what percent of the population is being killed by the police, and compare that by how much they are represented in the actual population. So another factoid I should mention here, which is, I think, important in understanding the epidemic of police shooting, is that 95% of the victims on any given year will be male. Okay, so that in part makes sense because police brutality is likely to be geared toward males because males are typically the more aggressive members of the species. So that shouldn't shock us too much. What's to say here then is that there is a disparity then between how often the police are killing black males compared to the rest of the population. Let's see. So white males in the United States make up 35% of the U.S. population roughly, and they make up about 39% of all police killings. So as you can see, the disparity there is 4. They're overrepresented by 4, okay? They're 4% overrepresented in the number of killings. But if you look at black males and you compare their representation in the number of people who are killed, you can see that they're 14% higher represented in their disparity than white males. And you can see that that disparity declines a little bit for Hispanics, that their disparity is represented by about 6%. Okay. Mm-hmm. What this shows to me is, firstly, by the numbers themselves, by the fact of the numbers themselves, that nearly 1,000 U.S. citizens die each year. What that shows me is that American police are generally brutal and violent.
And scary.
Okay? That's a separate, right, that's a separate question than the race question, which is here. The next thing that the number highlights for me is that these 399 people, this nearly 40% of people who are killed by police are white. That overwhelmingly says that police brutality is not solely a black issue. Although if we look at the media, it almost appears that blacks are the only race that is dealing with the epidemic of police shooting. And that is not true. That is not true. On the raw numbers, white people are being killed more in the United States. Okay? The reason why we don't know that is obvious. These are, again, poor and working class whites. Yep. In our country, lives do not matter. So we don't hear about the number of white people who are dying. Again, culturally, this issue dates back to our founding. In 1667, 75% of the U.S. population did not have the right to vote.
Yeah.
Yet only 10% of the U.S. population at the time was black. So that should tell you something about what we're dealing with here. What we're dealing with is actually a class war that started
Yeah.
between rich whites and poor whites, and race dynamic was interjected as to distract and confuse away from the struggle of political power and economic rights. And so the way that translates in 2020 is that the vast majority of people being killed by police are actually forming the party that's saying Blue Lives Matter,
Right.
support the police.
Right.
Why? Because the class war has been inverted due to the conditioning of the racial dynamic. The racial dynamic is inserted to distract poor working class whites from the fact that they're being oppressed due to their class warfare in the United
Yeah.
States. And so, what this looks like for blacks is like a hyper violent moment, right? That the lynchings are done by the lower class whites, and the government itself uses essentially the gunning down of black men in streets is the way the U.S. government is lynching black men. So we get it from the government, and we also get it from the beaten and abused, what I would almost compare to as a battered wife syndrome whites in the United States.
Yeah.
So
I can get with it. I definitely can identify with that one.
so
I'm sorry, but I can. From a long
so
time ago.
Um, so the data really
uh,
does show a lot of different dynamics here. We see that there's a class component to police brutality. We see that there's
right.
a racial dynamic to police brutality. And over the Obama years, we didn't really have enough time to get into this, but we also see that there is a racial profiling prejudice against Latino in the police brutality system as well. Latinos are less likely. The reason why their disparity in numbers are not as high as blacks is not because police have more respect for Latinos. It's because the police try to apprehend them as to deport them.
Oh my gosh.
Is
Really?
more
It's
to
true.
deport Latinos
Yeah.
than
And then there's other agencies that come into play. The Border
right.
Patrol and oh my, and they
I,
all get ICE. They all get a piece of the pie. Oh,
so
jeez.
this is what the evolution of slave patrols and Indian removal looks like. It looks like the mass deportation of immigrants out of the United States. It looks like the execution of blacks on the streets. It looks like the mass incarceration system erected by people like Ronald Reagan and Joe Biden. That's kind of been the unleashing, in the words of Hillary Rodham Clinton, bringing the super predators to heel. That's what it looks like. The formation of what Michelle Alexander called the new Jim Crow. And that's why you have Black Lives Matter coming up as an organization. And actually, white people, believe it or not, should be saying white lives matter. What they should be saying is poor white lives matter, actually.
And stop and don't
Because,
stop old ladies like me because I go into a neighborhood where my daughter lives and they peg me and stop me after they run my plates and stop me as a drug buyer. What does that say about that's still discriminating because it's figuring that I'm in the neighborhood only because I'm buying drugs. Like people just don't live there. Like my kid.
right.
See?
And there's these type of prejudice, and this is
Pathetic.
ultimately the movement that Dr. King was trying to reveal to America, was that poor blacks are in the same struggle that poor whites are in. Okay? The struggle is more pronounced with blacks is because the capitalist system uses race as a diversion, but that diversion is not an illusion. It's
Yeah.
very real. Okay, so people have to understand. I'm not saying it's a distraction as if it's kind of like smoke and mirrors,
Right.
because it's very real. Black people really are regimented to ghettos in the United States. Appalachian State University really is cut off to the vast majority of Negro people in the United States, and that's the history. And I keep on mentioning my school because I have legacy there, but that's the
Yeah.
legacy.
Well, you're
It's,
closer
it's,
to
it's,
your school than like I am. I'm farther away by decades.
but
That's where we were.
when I talk about my public institution, Appalachian
Yes.
State, I'm really talking about American universities across the board,
Sure. We've
right?
discussed this. Yes. I mean,
That
I was there for a love forever. Gotcha.
that these systems are meant to systematically oppress and hold down whole classes of people, not based on their race per se, but based on their socioeconomic standing.
Right.
And that's why, really, after the issue of slavery was resolved in the United States through the Civil War and Reconstruction, blacks had actually gained not the full autonomy, but equal autonomy to poor whites. And it was said by Lyndon Baines Johnson, understanding that in order to get a poor white man's vote, you must convince him that he is better than the Negro on a Negro's best day.
Mm.
And if you can convince a poor, down in the holler white person that he's better than the best
Right.
Negro, then he'll get his vote every time. So that's the interjection of the class struggle. We see that the policing institution in the United States, people should be aware of. If policing in the United States looks ugly, it is because the United States looks ugly. The policing is nothing but a representation of the race and class dynamic in the United States from our history to our present. And it is visceral, but it's always been visceral. And just like in 1835, when the Indian removal rangers, they would not slaughter Native American families right in front of good old white Christian families after church, although they would hang Negroes after church in the South as a kind of gathering. You know, today we go to the movie theaters after church or something like that. But in the 1920s, in the 1840s, in that era, they would go after church to the local lynching. And there's plenty of picture and
I'm
photography from those
grimacing
times.
because it's so hideous to think about all of the wrongdoing. I mean, I'm not ignorant of history. I'm not ignorant of history for a myriad of horrors. This is one myriad of human horrors. We're always creating and committing horrors. Now we're in the Anthropocene because we're creating horrors against our animal and natural kingdoms. Just there we go. It's
And the last thing I wanted to say about the police shootings in the United States, as far as their
yes.
numbers, in the 2018 count, was you'll notice at the bottom, I highlighted in purple crimson
Okay,
that
wait. Let me bring it back up. Okay, what's up?
that the last number there was mental health.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, this hits home for me because I actually work in the arena of mental health. I work with people who have intellectual developmental disabilities and duly diagnosed with forms of psychosis. And to see that people with mental health would represent on any given year between 20 to 25% of all police killings really decimated my spirit in a way that was even more harsh than how my spirit had been decimated by the realization of police brutality toward blacks. Because to see someone that you care about in a mental health crisis, to see them going through a struggle to see how confused, scared, and alone they are, and to be met with the police in a situation that results in almost 200 separate individuals losing their lives to gunfire is absolutely horrendous. It shows that our police have no idea how to engage people who are going through a mental health crisis. I don't even want to recount the stories of where people with mental health crises had called 911 as an act to save themselves and people around them. And in that moment where they thought they were doing the right thing by calling the authorities, they end up losing their life. It's the last thing they'll ever do. Okay. We've actually had to warn our paraprofessional staff here, our direct care staff, that if any of our participants are having a crisis in the community, to call the hotline intervention number and not 911, in fear that the police will not know how to actually handle the crisis, and we very well likely would lose the life of one of our participants in the program. Um, and that's a very scary situation to be in. Okay. So trying to understand policing from this perspective really opens it up, because I don't think that police are prejudiced against people with mental disabilities. I generally think that that's a lack of training. So what does that show you about policing? We asked that initial question, or we made that initial statement. If someone tells you who they are, I believe them. So who then have the police in the United States told us they are? They've told us that we are extremely classist. That if you're poor in the United States, if you don't have the ability to afford a lawyer, if you don't have an ability to move the system in your direction, you're going to get humbled. Your life doesn't matter. If you're a Negro American in the United States, your life doesn't matter. If you're a Latino in the United States, watch out. You're going to get deported. You're going to be Indian removed. You got to remember, half of the United States is formerly Mexico. So, I feel like in large respect, we're just doing what we've been doing.
Yeah.
Um,
But
and then,
there's got to be a point though where well, we look at what's happening currently and say where the change is going to be. Where are they going to be? You're so young. You have to see a path, possibly. Uh, you know,
Not at all.
not at
No,
all.
no. The older generations, and I'm particularly angry about this, but I think they took that from me in this last election cycle.
I'm in it.
That we had a genuine alternative to this nightmarish, hellish scenario,
Yeah.
and instead we are now left with the progenitor of the mass incarceration system and the epitome of rich white psychotic narcissistic privilege. Who is who? I don't know. I'll let you decide.
Well, if you let me decide, I'll be talking about probably both of them for longer than we have. Oh my god.
So we're in this moment where, a lot of people have given me a lot of pushback because I can't bring myself to vote for Joe Biden. But this is a man, I don't see him really that much different than Donald Trump. This is a man who said that he didn't want his kids growing up in a quote unquote race jungle. This is a man who
Yeah,
lied
that's a
about.
pretty kind of cringe. It's cringe. That's the new word now. Cringe, cringe. Maybe it's an old new word, but I'm picking up the word cringe, and it's absolutely perfect for a lot of what's going on politically. Sorry, I'm bouncing
Everything
around.
about Joe Biden is cringeworthy.
God,
But
Antonio, are we fucked?
we are. I mean, this is the
Boy,
guy.
did your face change the minute I said that. You went, oh. Sorry.
this is the guy. I really became dispirited after this round of elections because I realized that, like you say, Sandy,
Yeah.
we have plenty of opportunity to go in an opposite direction now. But now we're literally going to put up between a proto-fascist and the mass incarceration state. That's our votes now.
Well, we can hope that we can at least not lose the right to protest and peacefully assemble. That's what I'm afraid of. I don't, we could get into a debate on if the Democrats would let that happen or not, but I don't
We don't
want to.
debate it. We saw it.
We,
Obama said he's going to let it. When we saw the protest at DAPL, talk about Native
yeah,
American women,
that's true. That was horrible.
we
They should have
saw that happen
interjected.
straight in front of our face. We saw a girl's arm get blown off. We saw people getting watered down with water
And
cannons.
everyone was awake during Standing Rock. I mean, there were marches and demonstrations all over the country, and fighting pipelines. But that's what I'm afraid of losing. I'm really afraid of losing.
We saw Occupy Wall Street.
Yep.
Obama came out, called them thugs, and we saw police departments crack the heads of Occupy people, of protesters across coast to coast. So I don't know
so
what people are talking. Do we have collective amnesia? I have no idea what
No,
people are.
we have denial. And I mean, I suffer it sometimes. So you know that because we've had this discussion.
Black Lives Matter as an organization started under the Obama administration with Eric Holder as the Attorney General. So I don't know what people is Trump a monster? Of course he is. Is Biden a monster? Of course he is. So to me, asking, to literally ask me to make a vote for Joe Biden or for a vote for Trump.
Oh, I didn't. I wouldn't.
And I'm just saying hypothetically, but there are people who've told me, they wagged their finger at me and said, no, you got to vote for Joe.
Well, there's a Green Party candidate, Howie Hawkins, right?
I probably am going to vote for the Green Party. I voted for Jill Stein in 16.
Well, then you do what you feel morally and comfortable with. I would certainly never tell you what to do. No.
Well, I will say to those people
you won't tell me what to do
at me, and say that I have to vote for Joe Biden, is that I will tell them that voting for Joe Biden is voting for the mass incarceration of black people. Voting for Joe Biden is voting for militarized police. Voting for Joe Biden is a vote for nothing to fundamentally change. And that was his promise to us.
My heart. It just, it sounds so naive.
And think about that. Think about how monstrous that is, right? So we're all looking at the Trump administration, and we're all looking at how horrible he's been over the last 4 years. Biden included is looking at this. And Biden's response to this, looking at this nightmare, is if you vote for me, nothing will fundamentally change.
The only way it's going to fundamentally change, I think, is locally. If we go down and we keep voting in progressives, there's a lot of progressives that are on the ticket because
is coming from popular mobilization. We've been looking for popular mobilization efforts. Now they're going to push back against this any way they want, but we've seen that we're actually now having a legitimate conversation in the United States about defunding the police and asking the question, why do we have police responding to social work? The fact that we have police responding to social work actually shows that the social contract theory in America is under assault. That we should have robust social programs that respond to people in health and mental crises, not police with guns who are sanctioned by the state to kill.
Yeah, I hear you there. I do. Hey, do you want to do a little segue into playing with that data on that?
Well, that's a good time for us to piece that together, because I also want it for our audience at home. I think it's important to arm people with knowledge and data. And this tool here will allow you to go in and look, who are the females who died by the police in 2019 or 2018 or 15 or whatever year? Who are the males? Who were the blacks? Who were how many Hispanics, how many whites, how many people with mental health. So we'll get to
All
play
right.
around a little bit with this Washington Post database so that people can get to see its own functionality and they can look this up on their own or possibly help explain to friends who are saying, wow, it's a couple of bad apples. This is not a systemic problem. Let me also respond to that point, the people who say that. If someone ever tells you that policing in the United States is a couple of bad apples, first of all, how many is a couple? And
Yeah.
and
Sorry, I've
and
seen a lot more than a couple.
and and to say that it's a bad apple, to translate that into statistical language, is to say that police brutality is by chance. It is not systematic. It's random. But if it were random, then it would not be the case that every single year we get on average 1,000 deaths. That
Oh,
every single year 40% will be white, every single year 20 to 25% will be black. That would not happen unless there is a systematic culture of brutality, present in American policing. So let's look at this database and let's chop it up. So as you can see, we break it down by state so we can look at the database, police shootings by state.
okay,
We
what
break it
state?
down by gender. I'm sorry.
What state you want me to put in?
Let's do my own home state of North Carolina.
Yeah, that's what I want to do. Go by what you say and explain everything to everybody as I pick what you say to pick. All right.
Okay.
North Carolina. You have to forgive me tonight. I'm trying my best to be like, okay, I'm drinking this coffee, and guess what? It wasn't. It's high test. I picked the wrong
And
coffee. I'm all red, and I'm fiddling
this is
around.
18. Looking at you're 18.
Uh, I'll pick year 18 if that's what you want, and then what age group? Well, you tell me. Let's go through the list and tell me what you like.
So, well, let's do North Carolina,
Mm-hmm.
gender male. Let's
Okay.
look at how many black people. So let's do black. We
Race.
won't touch the age.
Okay. So what we won't punch the age? Okay, so I have 49 people shot and killed by police. 49 black men in North Carolina. That's what it
And can
says.
you also click to see if they were armed or not?
Weapon. Which weapon would you like? Is it just there's 38 was predominantly, it said 38 shot and killed with a gun? Wow. 38 had a gun and 4 had a knife and one was they used a vehicle as a weapon and then 2 of them had toy weapons and 2 more had other, who knows what other is, an unknown. Somebody had an unknown weapon. They might have been talking too much. Seriously.
Well, another thing about these reports are, again, these are the reports that the police um, they write the reports. Okay, I will tell you in my personal experience, both in college and in the real world, I don't trust police reports. I always look at police reports with an air of skepticism, as any reasonable person should do.
What a shame
We've
that we
actually
have to feel
seen
that
footage.
way.
It's a damn shame. We've actually seen footage where police officers either planted weapons or drugs on people. And then, of course, their reports, they forgot their body cams were on, and their reports said the opposite. So
On
again,
this, yeah.
don't be totally surprised by looking at that. The next one I want to do, Sandy, is look at mental health.
Okay, it says no or unknown or yes. So there were 2 with a gun. Should I get rid of the gun and just
Yeah,
keep?
you can get rid
Okay,
of the gun.
so 2 in North. So in oh shit, I lost it. Okay, yes, 3 people. 3 people had a mental illness that were black males that were killed. 3 of them.
And so that's another cool thing that you can do at this website is
Yeah.
so if you really wanted to piece through the data, get even more specific
It
than the
really
data
is cool.
that
Wow.
I showed you, you could actually go in if you want to based off of this data and piece together how many people specifically who are black with mental illness died, how many people who are specifically white with mental illness died,
I
or
want to
how many,
see how
you
many
know,
women died. I was looking at this before,
yeah.
Antonio, looking at females, and because this was like it was neat. It was reminding me of some old statistics and crap I used to go through. So I want to see females, and I'm just going to look at female. And in 2020 so far, 16 females were shot and killed by police. 16 so far.
Right.
And now
And
let's
you're
see. 11 were white, one was black, one was two were Hispanic, one was other, and one was unknown. Now that's the United States. I didn't pick a state. So let's pick a state. If I didn't pick a state, that's the total, right?
right. And the general average, like I said, is that 95% of police killings are going to be males. Leading.
Yeah, they are. Oh, they are. I was
Yeah.
definitely. But so I guess affirmative action has worked for females, at least who cops want to kill. So that sounds wild, but as a former affirmative action officer, as I was, who we had to do the plan, and it was a big job, and that's what this reminded me of a little bit. Using the statistics to see, but of course the data was hiring and discrimination and a lot different, but this is still statistics of pretty wild. Pretty wild. Did you want to look at all at the other article that I had on the
Sure.
police killings in the U.S.? I thought it was a pretty interesting one, but I don't, we both didn't have, I don't know if you had enough time to go through the whole thing. There is a paper that came out, and it is police killings in the U.S. Inequalities by race, ethnicity, and
Oh, and
socio.
it leaves out socioeconomic dynamic and education, which is something that I
Yeah,
earlier. Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. So it's going to be in the references, so you guys can see it in the references. And there's a lot of data in here. I don't think we have enough time to go through it now, but they do go through poverty and highest and lowest. I just think it's really interesting. Unless you want to specifically go through any of them that are in here, Antonio.
Um, it does go through poverty. It does talk about poverty, how
Yes,
that's
it has the census tract. What it said was the analysis shows that socioeconomic position plays a big role in police killings. The highest poverty areas have a police killing rate of 6.4 million, while the lowest poverty areas have a police killing rate of 1.8 per million. So 6.4 per million and a 3.5 fold difference. So
so
you're right on everything you say, according to this
right. And I
research.
didn't even. And again, that's the thing about this. That's how I know that the system is systematic, right? I didn't
Yeah,
even know what the statistics were, but
yeah.
I. If this is a system, then I already kind of know
Hmm.
what it should look like,
Yeah, and
and if
it looks just like you
statistics
said.
bear it out.
Yep. All right, so guys, that's that one. It was pretty cool. And the only other thing, well, I did have another thing. I pulled up Twitter, and I have two. I had something I liked it, but I don't know if this was okay. Here, wait. From the CDC study, victims were majority white, 52%, but disproportionately black, 32%, with a fatality rate of 2.8 times higher among blacks than whites. This is what everyone has been saying all along. The victims of police killings are disproportionately black. That's what that guy said. That's what you said.
And Sandy, I actually, can you go back to the
Yep.
article? I wanted to read that paragraph right under the chart because I thought it
Okay.
hits the point home pretty well here.
All
Because
right.
people always talk to me about, particularly poor whites, this issue of white privilege. And I want to speak to the multifacetedness of white privilege and how it's really coupled with money privilege. And I think that point is made home in policing in that one paragraph when it talks about the disparities interracially between the socioeconomic classes. And I think that was a really good point. So here it is. A similar class view exists within each racial group as well. Whites in the poorest areas have a police killing rate of 7.9 per million, compared to 2 per million for whites in the least poor areas. Blacks in the poorest areas have a police killing rate of 12.3 per million, compared to 6.7 per million for in the least poor areas. What's devastating about this is incredible, and this is the point that I was making to one of my friends, is that, I recognize in America, I happen to grow up solidly middle class, and I've seen the plethora of privileges granted to me from that.
Right. We have.
And I told my friend, though, but I'm not so lost in my class that I don't understand. I, too, am a bullet away from
you are.
a trigger-happy, pissed-off cop.
You are. You are. And it frightens me all the time. And I think about you all the time. You drove up here, and I thought about you coming on the way up because you came by yourself. So yeah, I do. I think like that. It's a very uncomfortable thing your mother must go through too, thinking about her son out there. Every mother, but I mean really every black mother of a son has to be feeling this as a mother. I'm saying this as a mom.
It is, and that the feeling, because I tell people, particularly white Americans, no matter what our history is here in America, this is my only home. And to feel so unwelcome here culturally, historically, I remember growing up, and the first time that I learned about slavery in second grade in North Carolina, it had just brought tears to my eyes. Not because it was so horrific, which of course it was. In second grade, they weren't sharing all of the details, but just the idea that my country considered me less than because of my skin.
Yeah, it's hurtful. It's hurtful to those of us that, I guess, have a heart or feel, or I don't know what the hell it's called, just feel that humanity has put a heavy load on or the scales have always been tipped towards aggression and greed and usury. Slavery is usury in some way. I mean, it's horrible. And I
So,
know what I'm reacting. Maybe it seems naive, but it's with a deep passion and care, because that was part of my chosen field, I suppose. It's my claim to fame, for what that's worth.
so it is going to be a tough road forward. I think that there can be progress made on this. I think certainly with the climate crisis accelerating off the brakes, it's
100
important that
degrees in nice Siberia. That's fun.
So it's important that I think we get our police under control, under civic control, before things start to go south, because a lot of the brutalization tactics that we've seen are going to be weaponized against us in, of course, the most epic of marches there will ever be, the most epic of protests there will ever be, and that will be, at first they'll be called climate protests, but that will disintegrate quickly because they will turn into the protests for life on the planet. And that's why, we're looking at the police tactics. People have seen, and this has opened up our eyes. A lot of people watching that old man be pushed down, shoved down by the police the way he was.
In my city.
That it scared me more than anything, because it showed me that when it really, the rubber hits the road, the police are just going to unleash. They're just going to unleash hell on us. And that becomes evident to me as a black man, because The second I see them treating middle-class white people like they're black,
Oh my God.
that's that's when things get really, really scary.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, we're
Yeah.
headed.
And that's again, that's the brutality. It's like, what happened to this age group of police officers? They seem to all be in the same age group. So I guess I have to look at that and say, were they dropped on their head? Is it the
Well, we know
toxins
that
in their
officers,
food
for
coupled
example,
with the training?
of all professions, officers have more domestic violence records than any other profession.
Wow.
So I've almost gotten into the habit every time I see an officer, I ask them, "How's your wife?"
Oh, you got to be careful, buddy. Please don't give me a
No, I
heart
don't do that.
attack.
I don't do that. I wouldn't be here if I did
I
that.
know. I know. Well, listen, why don't we look at some of the comments and we'll wrap it up because I am actually tired. Guys, it's been great though. Antonio, you've done a phenomenal job talking and teaching, and it's good. And I think you have to continue to do that. Harley had said about, I was looking for he was talking about the qualified immunity. Um, but I don't. Something was about qualified immunity. Oh, get rid of it. Just get rid of it. Hi, Harley. Yeah, just get rid of qualified immunity. That's a big thing because if police know that there's ramifications to their shitty ass behavior, perhaps some of that will be a behavioral deterrent towards
But
doing
see,
it.
these are things, and I'm 26 years old, and I keep on mentioning that because most of the people on the planet are older than me. So, so,
Yeah, yeah,
so
maybe.
so these things that seem painfully obvious, it's like, wow, we actually have to say, if you have a cop that gets fired for doing
Yeah,
something that's
we
illegal or
do.
dangerous or whatever, he can't be hired back. Imagine any profession.
Oh my
Imagine if you had a
God.
doctor who
Right.
was just like haphazard, killing people here or there, whatever. And it was like, well, we'll just send them on down the street at the next hospital or something like.
Yeah.
No, it can't be a doctor anymore. The idea. First of all, the idea that the police will underreport the number of people that they kill systematically across the country every single year by at
And
least
lie about it.
50% is so devastating that it's just like we got to throw our hands up in the air right now. The precinct is on, so almost talking about these reforms is almost like talking about washing dishes as your house is on fire. We have a police force that, even when they're telling us based off of their own words, they're one of the most brutal police forces in the world. And
Wow.
that's all they say. And we know what they're saying is only half of the truth. Jesus.
I woke up in
Yeah,
a nightmare. I'm a sweet
it's
leaf.
a nightmare.
She says, yes, so important what you are sharing, Antonio. And thank you for this time. Always a great show, Sandy. Thank you both. Yeah. Thank you for coming because it felt good. It really did. It
I
did.
hope that knowledge is empowering, and I hope that you guys who are listening to the show and seeing this data, that you're able to use it and confront a lot of the ignorance around these
Yes.
topics out in your own lives.
Yeah. And don't feel guilty, defensive, or weird or anything. We are what we are, and we can change or at least educate others around us. Teach, what is it? Reach one and teach one. Tolerance. I've been around a lot of intolerance, and I open my mouth.
And let me lastly say this about Black Lives Matter. Of course, by now we know that when we say Black Lives Matter, we're not saying that only Black Lives Matter, or else it would say only Black Lives Matter.
Yeah.
What it's saying is it's going against the historical narrative in America. That no, you don't have presidents and officers who literally, I mean, maybe you have a couple, but the majority of America doesn't say Black lives don't matter. The systems in America say that, and they say it very, very loudly. And so what Black people are trying to do is equally loudly say, no, our lives do in fact matter.
And
Um,
that's a beautiful sentiment, and brings tears to me. Sounds hokey as shit, but it just does. And I sit back here and watch everything from the internet world. I haven't been able to get out there, and it's amazing, frightening for who's out there, but invigorating because I don't want to see it stop. I don't want to see it stop. I want to see equality. I want to see true equality before I die, but I don't know if it will happen. But I like the efforts.
Not in America.
I know.
I hate to be hyper realistic, but
Yeah, I know.
we've been doing this since 1619, and we still have police executing black men in the street with impunity.
Okay. I don't know what. Oh, there's something in the chat. Well, listen, guys. Thank you all for coming. It has been a really, really great night for me. And every time I talk with Antonio or we do something, I learn an immense amount of information I didn't before, or something goes and gets put together in my brain. I love it. Thank you so much, Antonio. Very, very much. Everybody says the same. Okay. Oh, you know what? We never showed that video you wanted me to download. Do you want to end with it?
What's in with it?
Okay. Good night, everybody. There's a video I downloaded for Antonio, and we forgot all about it. So here you go, and I'll see you on Thursday night, guys, 9:30 later. Alrighty. Peace out. Unity.
According to the Washington Post database called Fatal Force, 509 people have been shot and killed by the police in the U.S. so far just this year. 24% of those were black people. And that's despite the fact that the black population only makes up 13% of the total population of the United States. We want to take a closer look at these numbers. Joining me now is one of the reporters who worked on that database. This is Kimbrielle Kelly, and she's an investigative journalist with the Washington Post. She joins us from our Washington studio. So Kimbrielle, thank you very much for joining us. I'm wondering what inspired you and the Washington Post to start collecting this data?
Well, after Ferguson happened, we realized that the numbers that the FBI were keeping around officer-involved shootings, the fatalities, was really very low. And so we took it upon ourselves to track those numbers using internet sources, public records, and making telephone calls to try to figure out what a more accurate number was. And we found that first year that there were nearly 1,000 officer-involved fatal shootings. And our number was more than twice the number of the FBI numbers. And so we realized that we wanted to take a look at that number in the second year as well. So we continued to track those numbers in 2016.
So let me ask you the thing that everyone wants to know, which is, are black people being disproportionately killed by various U.S. police departments?
Based on our research, we found that African Americans were disproportionately killed by officers, actually at a rate of 2.5 times greater than those who are white.
Any sense of why that's happening in the data?
That's a good question. I think the numbers speak for themselves, and we also saw some other trends too. In addition to the race issue, we also said that people who were mentally ill were a big portion of the victims of shootings as well.
Now, I understand these type of numbers are not collected by the U.S. government. Why isn't the government collecting this data, considering what a major political issue this is?
Well, there is a focus on collecting the data now. So the FBI has acknowledged, as you mentioned, that the system of collecting data was inadequate. Having 6% of the departments report this data, you're not getting a real understanding of what it is. So starting next year, we're supposed to see more accurate reporting of not only this, but other instances in which police officers use force, not just with firearms.
What's the response to the data that you've put out on Washington Post? Because I've seen it shared on social media so many times in the past week. I'm wondering what you're hearing.
I mean, it's a real response. People are happy that there's more accurate reporting. They feel like the racial issue, which can sometimes be talked about in anecdote, actually has numbers to show, as I mentioned, 2.5 times greater the rate for African Americans. So if you take a look at the victims of these incidents, about half of them are white, but as you mentioned, the smaller share of African Americans in this country, around 13%, to have a rate that's 2.5 times greater means that there a problem. So people are definitely interested in trying to fix this and resolve this, as you've heard from the president, as well as people who are really in policing. And the Department of Justice has taken a huge effort to try to remedy these problems at, problematic police departments as well.
We've certainly gotten the sense this week that the U.S. hit a boiling point with the violence that we've seen. What are you hoping will happen with your data? What do you hope to achieve with it?
Well, it's already clear that the FBI is making changes, so I think that's a very first step. You also see the Department of Justice continuing to take a stand and not just suggesting recommended changes to police departments, but really mandating them in courts and being willing to take police departments to court over these types of violations. And as they work with police departments across the country, they're suggesting changes and mandating them, frankly, for training, for record keeping, for risk management, that they hope in the end of the day will make these better police departments, and that the changes that are made at the bigger departments will, in some regards, trickle down to the remaining 15,000 to 18,000 police departments across the country.
According